Okay, so today we're going to be looking at e-text for lesson 7. This image shows a famous image associated with the Holocaust. Nazi troops removed Jewish residents from the Warsaw Ghetto after a failed uprising in 1943. So let me just. From the time he came to power, Adolf Hitler had targeted Jews for persecution. By the end of the war, the Nazis had murdered 6 million Jews and 5 million other people they considered inferior. In 1945, there was no word for Hitler's murderous plan of extermination. Today, it's called the Holocaust. We continue to remember this tragedy and seek ways to prevent anything like it ever happening again. Objectives: trace the roots and progress of Hitler's campaign against the Jews. Secondly, explain the goals of Hitler's final solution and the nature of Nazi death camps. Last, examine how the United States responded to the Holocaust. Key terms include, of course, Holocaust, anti-Semitism or anti-Semitism, Nazism, Kristallnacht, genocide, concentration camps, death camps, and the War Refugee Board. Mass murder of Jews, as well as other undesirables, were a direct result of a racist Nazi ideology that considered Aryans superior to other people. Aryan was a Nazi term for white people who were not Jewish, especially those with Germanic, Nordic, Anglo Saxon blood. Among the groups that the Nazis considered inferior were the Slavic peoples of Russia and Eastern Europe. So there you can see, okay, this propaganda poster from 1935 glorifies the image of what the Nazis saw as the ideal Aryan youth. At the same time, posters and comic books viciously uh, caricatured people of the Nazis considered inferior. And some of those we've already seen. All right, so let me just. From the start, the Nazi movement trafficked in anti Semitism. Hitler blamed Jews for all the ills of Germany, from communism to inflation to abstract painting, and especially for the defeat of Germany in World War I. Other extremists influenced Hitler's ideas and shared his prejudices. In the 1920s, his was just another angry voice in the Weimar Republic, advancing simplistic answers for the nation's grave economic, political, and social troubles. In 1933, however, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Hitler's campaign against the Jews. Hitler's persecution of the Jews began as soon as he came to power. At first, his focus was economic. He urged Germans to boycott Jewish owned businesses and barred Jews from jobs in civil service, banking, the stock exchange, law, journalism, and medicine. In 1935, Hitler moved to a broader legal persecution, the Nuremberg Laws. Named for the city that served as a spiritual center of Nazism, they denied German citizenship to Jews, banned marriage between Jews and non Jews, and segregated Jews at every level of society. Yet even these measures were not enough for Hitler. He hinted that in the future he might be, well, what he called the final solution to the Jewish question. Hitler employed the full power of the state in his anti Semitic campaigns. Newspapers printed scandalous attacks against Jews. Children in schools and the Hitler Youth movement were taught that Jews were polluting German society and culture. Comic books contained vile caricatures of Jews. Here's a picture of Hitler as greeted by the children in Poland. The white shirts and ties worn by the girls were part of the uniform of the female branch of the Hitler Youth Movement. The violence of Kristallnacht. Acts of violence against Jews were common. The most serious attack on German Jews took place on November 9th, 1938. It became known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. After a Jewish refugee killed a German diplomat in Paris, Nazi officials ordered attacks on Jews in Germany, Austria, and the Sudetenland. Secret police and military units destroyed more than 1,500 synagogues and 7,500 Jewish owned businesses, killed more than 200 Jews, injured more than 600 others, and arrested thousands. Refugees tried to escape. Between 1933 and 1937, about 129,000 Jews fled Germany and Nazi controlled Austria. They included some of the most notable figures in scientific and artistic world, including the physicist Albert Einstein. More Jews would have left, but they were not generally welcomed into other countries. During the Great Depression, with jobs scarce, the United States and other countries barred their doors to many Jews. In 1939, the ocean liner St. Louis departed Germany for Cuba with more than 900 Jewish refugees on board. Only 22 of the Jewish passengers received permission to stay in Cuba, and U.S. officials also refused to accept any of the refugees. The ship returned to Germany. More than a quarter of the Jews aboard the St. Louis later died in the Holocaust. Okay, so in your notebook, identify steps in a process. How did the Nazis deprive Jewish people of their rights? So go ahead and write down those tips that you got from the reading in your notebook. Do that now. So now we're going to be looking at Hitler's final solution. Since 1933, the Nazis had denied Jews the right of citizenship and committed acts of brutality against them. These acts of persecution were steps toward Hitler's final solution to the Jewish question: the systematic extermination of all Jews living in the region controlled by the Third Reich. Today we use the word genocide to describe this type of willful annihilation of a racial, political, or cultural group. The first concentration camps. In 1933, the year he became chancellor, Hitler opened the first Nazi concentration camps, areas where members of specially designated groups were confined. The earliest camps included Dachau, Sachsenhausen, Buchenwald. Later, Ravensbrück, not far from Berlin, was open for female prisoners. In theory, the camps were designed not to kill prisoners, but to turn them into useful members of the Third Reich. The Third Reich was a Nazi name for the regime that controlled Germany from 1933 to 1945. The Nazis imprisoned political opponents such as labor leaders, socialists, and communists, as well as anyone, journalists or novelists, ministers, priests, anyone who spoke out against Hitler. Many Jews, as well as Aryans, who had intimate relations with Jews, were sent to camps. Other groups targeted as undesirable, including Sinti and Roma, gypsies, Jehovah's Witnesses, gay men, the poor, alcoholics, conscientious objectors, the physically disabled, and people with mental illness. Camp administrators assigned serial numbers to prisoners, then dressed them in vertically striped uniforms with triangular insignias. For example, political prisoners wore red insignias, gay men pink, Jews yellow, Jehovah's Witnesses purple. Inside the walls of the concentration camps, there were no real restraints on sadistic guards. They tortured and even killed prisoners with no fear of reprisals from their superiors. And there's just a map of all the concentration camps. And then it asks you, okay, to analyze how did the locations of death camps differ from the location of concentration camps. So death camps are in purple, and orange are the major concentrations or forced labor camps. The Nazis built up death camps. When Germany invaded Poland and the Soviet Union, the Nazis gained control of large territories that were home to millions of Jews. Under Nazi rule, Jews in Warsaw, Lodz, and other Polish cities were forced to live in crowded, walled ghettos. Nazis also constructed additional concentration camps in Poland and Eastern Europe. At first, the murder of Jews and other prisoners tended to be more arbitrary than systematic. But at the Wannsee Conference in January 1942, Nazi leaders made the decision to move forward towards what they called Hitler's final solution. Reinhard Heydrich, as SS leader, known as the Man with the Iron Heart, outlined a plan to exterminate about 11 million Jews. Although the minutes of the meeting do not use the word kill, everyone there understood that killing was the goal. And here is a picture of Jewish prisoners shipped in cattle cars with no food or water to death camps across Europe. The yellow star that the Nazis forced Jews to wear can be seen on one woman's coat in this photograph. These concentration camp survivors were photographed shortly after their camp was liberated by the Allies. Prisoners were starving, ill-clad, and crammed into bare wooden bunks. Many concentration camps, especially in Poland, were designated as death camps, camps where prisoners were systematically exterminated. The largest death camp was Auschwitz in southern Poland. Others included Treblinka, Majdanek, Sobibor, Belzec, and Kelmna. Prisoners from various parts of the Reich were transported by trains to the death camps and murdered. Nazis forced prisoners into death chambers and pumped in carbon monoxide, or crammed the prisoners into shower-like facilities and released the insecticide Zyklon B. Some concentration camps that the Nazis converted into death camps did not have gassing equipment. In these camps, Nazi guards shot hundreds of thousands of prisoners. Nazi action groups that followed the army into Eastern Europe also shot several million Jews and buried them in ditches. In fully functioning death camps, the bodies of murdered prisoners were further desecrated. Human fat was turned into soap. Human hair was woven into wigs, slippers, and mattresses. Cash, gold fillings, wedding rings, and other valuables were stripped off the victims. After the Nazis had taken what they wanted, they burned the bodies in crematoriums. By 1945, about 6 million European Jews had been murdered. But Jews were not the only victims. As many as 5 million others lay dead, including nearly 2 million non-Jewish Poles. While many survivors lived with constant nightmares of the experience, or the sorrow and the guilt of being the last members of their families, many others determined to rebuild their lives and families in the United States, Israel, and elsewhere, and continue to be productive citizens. Summary question: what actions did the Nazis take to carry out Hitler's final solution? Allied response to the Holocaust. Could the Holocaust have been prevented? Could Western democracies, especially Britain, France, and the United States, have intervened to stop slaughter of millions of innocent people? There are no simple answers. However, many people today believe that the West could have done more than it did. Early in action. Before the war, the United States and other countries could have accepted more Jewish refugees from Germany and Austria. However, the U.S. State Department at first made a conscious effort to block Jewish immigration. Later, commentators have blamed this failure on several factors: anti Semitism, apathy, preoccupation with the Great Depression, and a tendency to underestimate Hitler's genocidal plans. The United States takes limited action. Once the war started, news of the mass killings filtered to the West. By the end of 1942, the Allies acknowledged that Jews were being taken into Poland and killed. In April 1943, British and American officials hosted the Bermuda Conference to discuss rescuing survivors, Jewish refugees, and saving them from Europe. However, no concrete action was taken. By early 1944, however, FDR began to respond to the reports. He established the War Refugee Board, a government agency that worked with the Red Cross to save thousands of Eastern European Jews, especially in Romania and Hungary. Tragically, two were saved. Of the Allies, the Soviet Union was the closest to death camps, but Stalin showed no concern. Britain and the United States expressed sympathy, but the resources and strategy were focused on defeating Hitler, not on stopping his genocidal campaign. They might have bombed railway lines to the death camps, but the death camps were not military targets. Here's a picture that shows Jewish children from Austria were among those who were eventually found in homes with their adopted families in the United States. A War Department official told the Refugee Board that bombing the railway lines could be executed only by the diversion of considerable air support essential to the success of our forces now engaged in decisive operations elsewhere. The Allies also refused to pressure countries within the Nazi sphere of influence to stop transportation of Jews to Germany. Well, there was a war going on, so there wasn't too much diplomacy during the middle of a world war, but okay, that's up to you to decide. The liberation of the concentration camps. As they pushed towards Germany from the east and west, Soviet and American troops liberated the camps one by one. For most Americans, the enormity of the Nazi crime became real only when the camp liberators began to report back on what they found. When they saw it, the piles of dead bodies, the warehouses full of human hair and jewelry, the ashes in crematoriums, the half-dead, emaciated survivors, they realized as never before that evil was more than an abstraction. Hardened by war, accustomed to the sight of the smell of death, the liberators were nevertheless unprepared for what they saw. Major Richard Winters was stunned, almost beyond belief. The memory of the starved, dazed men who dropped their eyes and heads when we looked at them through the chain link fence in the same manner that a beaten, mistreated dog would cringe. These feelings that cannot be described and will never be forgotten. The impact of seeing those people behind that fence left me saying, only to myself, now I know why I'm here. And that's from Richard Winters, quoted in Band of Brothers. The liberation of the camps led to the outpouring of an American sympathy and sincere longing to aid the victims. Many survivors found temporary or permanent homes in the United States. The revelation of the Holocaust also increased demand and support for an independent Jewish homeland. In 1948, when the Jewish community in the Palestine Mandate proclaimed the State of Israel, President Truman immediately recognized the nation. Since then, the United States has continued to offer strong support to Israel. Today, people in the United States and around the world are working to make sure the Holocaust is not forgotten. In 1993, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum opened in Washington, D.C. Holocaust memorials can also be found in many states across the nation. In 1994, a movie director, Steven Spielberg, founded an institute that recorded nearly 52,000 interviews with survivors and witnesses of the Holocaust. Here's an image of April 1945, shows former prisoners of Dachau gathering as the American liberators raised the American flag over the camp. And question: do you think the U.S. military made the right decision or wrong decision when they decided not to bomb railway lines leading to the death camps? Explain your reasoning. Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer. I mean, obviously, you want to save lives, but would that have saved lives? Because they just didn't use these killing centers, they also shot them as well. But it's a good question.